store know how much of a particular product to order? Or what exactly determines how much it's going to cost for you to go and fill up your gas tank or go and spend a weekend at the beach with your friends? People generally do not think about these types of things or understand the basic economic concepts behind them, but understanding them is the key to understanding how our economy functions. How's it going, macro class? Here we are for our Unit 1 review, basic economic functions. As you can see, I have taken to quarantine quite well. I am pretty cozy with my grout fit right now. Well, minus the navy blue. Still cozy nonetheless. So, today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the basic economic concepts and other Unit 1 principles that you need to understand to get a good grade on the AP macro test. To start our review, we will start with scarcity, where we will talk about opportunity cost trade-offs and the 4 factors of productions. Moving from there, we're going to look at the production's possibilities curve. We're going to look at how this curve can map out how an economy is currently functioning. We'll also talk about shifters of the production possibility curves and how that shows a growing or shrinking economy. From there, we'll talk about comparative advantage in trade and talk about why it's important for different countries or economies to specialize in trade and how that can better their economy and help them produce outside of that production's possibility curve. And lastly, we're going to touch base upon supply and demand headline shifters of both of those curves and how to identify market equilibrium. So the reality of life is you can't always get everything you want. Sure, I dream about having a sweet house in the Amalfi Coast, bunch of cars, in-ground swimming pool, go-kart track, I don't know. So even in a country with a strong economy like the United States, a lot of families can't afford these luxuries. So they must make choices. Whether to go on a family vacation or install a fence in the backyard so little Lucky stops running into the road, we are constantly faced with decisions on how to allocate the limited resources we have available to us. This is going to be the whole idea of scarcity. Scarcity is going to be the driving force of our economy. A scarce resource is not available in efficient quantities to satisfy all the various ways that a society wants to use it. Scarcity is going to drive supply and demand. And before I get ahead of myself, I do want to talk about the difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics. You obviously may have noticed that you were signed up for AP Macroeconomics, but you may have also heard of this word called microeconomics being thrown around in our beginning units, such as the unit we're currently reviewing. Well, what exactly is the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics? Great question. Microeconomics is going to be the study of how individuals, households, and firms make economic decisions and how those decisions interact. With microeconomics, we're going to be looking at small-scale economics. We're going to be looking at different companies or businesses. We're going to be looking at the sector for cell phones, so Samsung versus Apple. We're going to be looking at market monopolies and things like that. While macroeconomics is going to be concerned with the overall ups and downs of major economic structures, such as the United States economy. So this whole first unit is going to be about general economic topics that apply to both micro and macroeconomics. These concepts are the foundation for all of economics, so they are very important to understand. So when talking about macroeconomics, it is very important to understand the 2 different economic systems that we have today. So in Germany in 1848, Karl Marx is going to publish the Communist Manifesto, outlining the economic structure of what we know now today as a command economy. In a command economy, the factors of productions are owned by a central authority. On the opposite end of the economic spectrum, we have the market economy. This is where the factors of production are in the hands of the people and the free market. This is what we generally think of when we think of a capitalist economy. These ideas stemming from the works of Adam Smith's publication of The Wealth of Nations in 1776. Adam Smith also preached the whole idea of the invisible hand of capitalism, which is the idea that all of society's goals will be achieved as people look after their own well-being. When you think about it, it sort of makes sense. If I were a baker, it would be my job to make the best baked goods possible at the lowest price possible. If I can't achieve this, people are going to go elsewhere to find their baked goods. It is for my own good to try and make the best product for other people. The whole idea centers around the fact that the government does not need to get involved because supply and demand of high quality goods at a low price is going to drive innovation. Both these economic systems are going to attempt to answer the same 3 big economic questions. 1, what goods and services should be produced? 2, how should they be produced? And 3, who consumes them? Now, before we get into all the graphs, we still have a few basic ideas we need to understand. Factors of production are going to be the goods and resources available to supply goods and services in the economy. Factors of production are going to include land, labor, capital, and enterprise. Land is going to be the natural resources we have, like gas, steel, trees, things like that. Labor is going to be the effort of the workers, so going to work at their specified job and doing what they have to do to keep the economy going. This is going to be our human input in the production process. Capital goods are going to be manufactured goods that are going to produce other goods. These are things like tractors for farms or machines that are going to be in factories. And last, we have entrepreneurs. These are people who take economic risk in order to inspire innovation. Each one of these factors can be found in the circular flow diagram, which maps out the functions of the macroeconomy. You can see with the circular flow model that there is a product market that distributes goods and services. These would be your Walmarts and your Amazons selling goods to households, while the resource market takes in land, labor, and capital. These are going to be the companies that people choose to work for to receive a paycheck. So when your parents wake up every morning and go to their 9 to 5, that's them being part of the resource market. So this morning when I woke up at the early hour of 10 o'clock, I decided I have two options of what I can do. I can make this video, or I can go play PlayStation 4 for a few hours. Needless to say, I decided to make this video. With this decision, and just like every decision you make, there is a trade-off. In economics, we focus on something called the opportunity cost. Like a trade-off, the opportunity cost is going to be the next best alternative you must give up to make a decision. The first key graph that I'm going to show to you is going to show you opportunity cost in an economy. The production's possibilities curve is a model that shows different ways an economy can allocate its scarce resources. So, I'm going to provide a little scenario for us. So let's say the data shows the amount of review videos I can make in a given week. This is taking account for things like how much time I have to make videos, how much time each video takes to actually make, how much time it takes to edit the psych videos versus the macro videos, etc., etc., etc. At point A, you can see that I can make 8 psych videos and 0 macro videos. This goes down all the way to point E, where I can make 0 psych videos and 4 macro videos. On this curve, it's going to show us at each point what I can produce in that given week. So at point A, I could say, hey, I'm going to make 8 psych videos this week, and I'll save the macro videos for another time. Or I'll decide maybe I'll split them up a little bit, and I can make 4 psych videos this week and 2 macro videos this week over at point C. No matter what I decide to do, this is my maximum amount of output when I am working at my most efficiently. So let's say I'm producing somewhere inside of the curve. All that means is that I'm not producing at my most efficiently. That means like during the week I've only made 4 psych videos, or I've only made 2 psych videos and 1 macro video. I am known to be able to produce more videos than that, so I am producing inefficiently. What about what happens outside of the curve? Outside of the curve, what that shows is we are overproducing. We cannot attain that level of production unless something like new technology comes out. So maybe I'm introduced to a new video editing program that lets me edit videos twice as fast. Now let's get back to our table. Notice how for each macro video I gain, I lose 2 psych videos. This is true for movement along each point. So from point A to B, I'm losing 2 psych videos, gaining 1 macro. B to C, losing 2 psych, gaining 1 macro. This gives us something called constant opportunity cost. And this happens because the opportunity costs for making videos are quite similar, so it's expected that reallocating resources for these 2 activities is not that difficult. In turn, we see that on our PPC from earlier, it's a straight line. This shows us that resources between these 2 materials are very similar, which makes sense. There's not much of a difference in what I have to do to make a psych video or a macro video. Now let's take a look at some more data. In this table, we can see the opportunity cost that an economy has for producing cars and houses. Now, unlike deciding between which video to make, this decision is going to be a little different. Notice how from point A to B, we lose 4 cars. Now notice how from point B to C, we lose 8 cars. That's because in this theoretical situation, it takes more resources to create houses than it does to create cars. So as we make more houses, we sacrifice resources for our cars. So the more houses we make, the more cars we are going to lose. This will give our PPC a bowed out appearance. Alright, so now that we're experts on the production's possibility curve, it is time to move on to specialization and trade. What we are going to learn here is exactly how countries can both benefit from one another by specializing in the production of a good or service and trading it. So when looking at terms of trade, there are 2 very important terms to know. These 2 terms are absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Absolute advantage is basically the idea that some people or businesses or countries are better at producing a specific good or service over that of another country. The absolute advantage is just that. who can ever produce the most of a specific good. Now, with an economy like the United States, if we wanted to allocate all of our resources to center our economy around the production of a new computer software, we would probably be able to do that. If we took funding from everywhere and put it into this software development, I'm absolutely sure that we would have the absolute advantage in that category. However, that's not necessarily practical. The U.S. has far better use for those resources in other sectors that we specialize in. This is where the idea of comparative advantage comes in. The comparative advantage is just the person or business or country that can produce a product with the lowest opportunity cost. So countries should only specialize in trade if they have the comparative advantage. So let's take a look at an example. So here we have two productions possibility curves. Well, what exactly are they showing us? They show us how many computer hard drives and cars both the US and Japan can produce at any given time. So before we jump into anything, let's see if we can find out who has the absolute advantage in each product. Looking at our graphs, we can see that the US can produce 4 computers while Japan can produce 5 computers. So since Japan can produce more, it gives Japan the absolute advantage in computer production. Now let's look at cars. The US can produce 12 cars while Japan can produce 10 cars. So since the US can produce 12 cars over the Japan's 10, that gives the US the absolute advantage in car production. What exactly is the point in trading? It appears that both the US and Japan can produce a fair amount of their own resources. Why trade? That's what we're going to find out. We're going to see how specialization of trade can allow countries to consume outside of the production's possibilities curve. So our next steps are going to be to create a chart. This is going to help us determine something called per unit opportunity cost. All we have to do is put our countries on the side, so USA and Japan on our side, and then our good or service is going to be at the top. So we're going to have computer hard drives and cars up at the top. Then we plug in our numbers. So the USA can produce 4 computers or 12 cars at any given time. So we put those two numbers in the graph. And then Japan can produce 5 computers or 10 cars at any given time. So they go into the graph. So we already determined who had the absolute advantage in each good. Now it's time to determine who has the comparative advantage in each good. And this is going to be a little more tricky. So next we have to talk about something called per unit opportunity cost. So basically, if I were the USA, what is the opportunity cost for just one of my items, either the computer or the cars? To calculate per unit opportunity cost, all you have to do is take the cost of what you are producing and divide it by what you are gaining. So it's going to be cost over gain. So for the US, what we would want to do to find the per unit opportunity cost for computers is take what it would cost to produce 4 computers, which would be 12 cars, and divide that by what we would gain, which would be the 4 computers. This gives us the per unit opportunity cost of 1 computer costing us 3 cars. So in the US, to produce 1 computer, we are giving up 3 cars. So what I want you to do is pause the video right here and use the cost over gain formula to find out the per unit opportunity cost for the rest of the values left in the graph. Good luck. Alright, so now that we have all of our graph filled out, how do we go about figuring out the comparative advantage? So the opportunity cost for the US to produce 1 computer is 3 cars. The opportunity cost for Japan to produce 1 computer is 2 cars. So how can we decide who has the comparative advantage with this information? Well, since Japan is only giving up 2 cars for each computer, the US giving up 3, Japan has the comparative advantage in computers. Once we find out what comparative advantage one country has, we automatically know that the other country has the comparative advantage in the other product because each country can only specialize in 1 good. So knowing that if Japan is going to specialize in computers, then the US will specialize in cars because that is the product they have a comparative advantage in. What next? How can both of these countries benefit from specializing in their product? Well, if the US decides to produce 12 cars and trade half, and then Japan decides to produce 5 computers and trade half, we see that each country is now operating outside of their production's possibilities curve. The US is now consuming 2.5 computers and 6 cars rather than 2 computers and 6 cars. Now on to supply, demand, and market equilibrium. So demand is going to be the different quantities of goods that consumers are willing and able to buy at different prices. So our key words here are going to be willing and able. I am completely able to go out and buy 20 rolls of toilet paper right now, but I'm not willing to. Don't want people thinking I'm a jerk. Now, another important aspect of demand is the law of demand, which basically states that there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. This law explains why the demand curve will always be downward sloping. At higher prices, consumers demand less. At lower prices, consumers demand more. It makes sense. When you see something that you like go down in price, chances are you're going to want to try and go out and buy it. If it goes up in price, you might push it off to another time. Next, we're going to get into shifters of the demand curve. So remember, there can be movement along the demand curve, which just shows demand at different price points, and there can also be shifts in demand. That's what we're going to be talking about next. It can be a fad or something simply going out of style, but demands for goods are often changing, and with those changes, we see a change in prices. So there are going to be 5 major factors that can lead to a demand shift, and we're going to go over each one. The first one we're going to talk about is going to be consumer taste and preferences. So if a good becomes more fashionable among consumers due to advertising, product improvement, or new technologies, demand generally will increase and shift to the right. If a good goes out of style or becomes less popular, demand will decrease and consumers will buy less of it. In turn, demand will shift to our left. Next, we have number of consumers. This one's fairly simple. The more consumers in the market calls for a rise in demand of goods. This makes sense. The more people in an economy, the more people out there working and spending money on goods and services. Next, we have the price of related goods. So in this section, we'll talk a little bit about substitute goods and complementary goods. So a substitute good, if it changes, demand for the good in question will change. Think chicken and beef. So if the price of beef just skyrockets one day, people might go out and buy more chicken, and this might shift the demand for chicken to the right. If the price of complementary good changes, demand changes as well. So let's say the price of salsa skyrockets, well, people might stop buying chips, so the demand for chips might shift to the left. For income, as we see an increase in income, normal goods are going to have a demand increase, and inferior goods are going to see a decrease in demand. This makes sense. As people have more disposable income, they might go for more name brand items over the store brand ones. And the last shifter of the demand curve is going to be future expectations. If consumers expect income to rise in the future, they are likely to demand more of most goods now. If I know that my holiday bonus of $20,000 is right around the corner, I might go and stock up on goods. Now, with every demand good, there must be a supply curve, and that's what we're going to be talking about next. So supply is a schedule or curve showing the various quantities of a particular good firms are willing and able to produce at a series of prices in any given period of time. Supply is upward sloping since the supply of a good is directly related to the price of a good. At higher prices, more firms find it profitable to produce a certain good or service. Therefore, the quantity supplied of that good or service is going to increase. Remember, just like a shift in the demand curve, you can have a shift in the supply curve as well. The 5 major determinants of supply shifts are what we are going to be focusing on next, starting with price and availability of resources. If the cost of resources firms use in productions decrease, supply of the output increases. This makes sense. If I have a company that needs a lot of steel to produce my goods and the price of steel goes down, I'm going to buy more steel and produce more goods. When costs rise, supply decreases. Think the cost of oil. When it goes up and it costs firms more money to deliver their products to their suppliers across the country, you're going to also see a decrease in supply. Next, we have number of sellers. Whenever a new firm either enters or leaves the market, you are going to see either a rightward or a leftward shift in the supply curve. The more firms there are to produce a specific good, the more of that good that is readily available. So a subsidy is just something that lowers firms' cost of productions and result in an increase in supply, while taxes are going to be a mandatory payment from producers to the government for each unit produced. A tax adds to a firm's cost of production and results in a decrease of supply. And last, we have expectations of future profit. If producers expect the price of their output to rise in the future, or they expect the incomes of their consumers to increase, they will increase their supply. If they expect the future demand to be low, they will reduce supply. So make sure you remember those shifters, because they are going to be very important for our next topic, which is economic equilibrium. So when the supply and demand of a good meet, we have market equilibrium. This is where the quantity supplied intersects the quantity demand. So when graphing supply and demand, you can either have a shortage or a surplus. A shortage is when the demand of a product exceeds the supply. This is going to lead to higher prices. On the reverse side of that, a surplus is going to be when the supply exceeds the demand, which is going to lead to lower prices. This is when you have too much of a good and not enough people after that good. So when looking at supply and demand, there are 4 things that can happen. 1, demand can go down. 2, demand can go up. 3, supply can go down. And 4, supply can go up. So let's take a look at an example. Let's say we're looking at the demand for something like toilet paper. Why not? Let's say the current equilibrium price for toilet paper is at $2 a roll. Let's say something crazy happens, like the World Health Organization just issues a worldwide pandemic and people start storming the stores for all the toilet paper they can get their hands on. In turn, the price of toilet paper starts to skyrocket. An increase in demand from D to D1 causes the equilibrium price and the quantity to rise. Let's say that we're looking at the market for chicken eggs. So say a report just comes out saying that chicken eggs cause hair loss. Well, this is going to cause D to go from D to D2, showing a leftward shift in demand, which is going to cause a price and quantity decrease. For supply, it's going to be the same idea. If any of the determinants change, supply will change. So let's say that new technology comes out that allows labs to grow meat. Well, this is going to lead to an increase in supply from S to S1, which is going to cause a decrease in price, but an increase in quantity. So we can now produce more of a good at a cheaper cost. On the other hand, let's say that we have a new governor, and this new governor just absolutely hates skateboarding, so he decides to ban skateboarding statewide. The government action could cause a decrease in supply from S to S2, causing the price to increase and the quantity to decrease. Sometimes you may even see a double shift. This is where a supply curve and a demand curve both shift at the same time. When this happens, either the price or quantity will be indeterminate. Alright, so next up we have our FRQ. I've taken the liberty of making a little photo story for your FRQ of the week. Enjoy. Alright guys, quick reminder, please for that FRQ, make sure you follow the proper FRQ guidelines. Either type it out on the computer, which might be a little harder for macro, but if you find a way, go for it, or write it out on a piece of paper using a dark colored pen, and then take a picture of that and upload the assignment to Google Classrooms. Also, just another reminder, remember these videos are just meant to be review videos. They are not going to tell you everything you need to know about the macro AP test. So on top of these videos, go onto the Google Classrooms, look at the other resources I've posted, and make sure you're keeping up with your studies. See you guys next week. I'm out.